I want to talk to you guys about the rewriting of history. Donald Trump is making a full court diplomatic push in order to woo the Russians. And some of this has been done through concessions that I believe undermine the Ukrainian negotiating position, saying that they will, before you've even gotten at the table, saying that, the Ukrainians are not going to be at the table. You're not welcoming them to the table. You're saying there will not be any U.S. troops in Ukraine. You're saying that Ukraine will not join NATO. You're already conceding that Ukraine will not get all of its territory back. You're saying, okay, Russia, you want Ukraine to have an election, so young men can leave the country and end martial law, and okay, we'll make that our demand. We'll say that's our demand, as if Donald Trump cared, and he's pretending that it was his demand, because you guys really think Donald Trump cares about the democratic standing inside of Ukraine? I don't think he does. I really do not think the guy who said he wanted to terminate the Constitution because he lost an election and then tried to overturn it cares that deeply about Ukraine's democratic principles. And if he did, maybe he would listen to the Rada, who just reaffirmed that they want to have elections after the war is over. Either way, I'm seeing Trump undermine the Ukrainian position through those practical ways and also just through humiliating ways. For example, brown-nosing the Russians when it comes to World War II, talking about going over there to visit them, as well as going even further than immediate concessions for negotiation, talking about the ending of sanctions policy and investment deals in Russia to help rebuild the Russian economy. Mind you, we haven't gotten commitments on security agreements for Ukraine that would prevent a future Russian invasion. We haven't gotten any clear outline for future aid shipments to Ukraine that would give them enough leverage to, deter a future invasion. We haven't gotten any concessions on the Ukrainian side. And this has all left me thinking, my God, we are really not negotiating well here. We're undermining our position. We're brown-nosing the Russians. What more could we do to undermine our position? Well, one thing we could do is to also turn the public against support for Ukraine to make it easier to undermine them. Now, how would you turn the public against support for Ukraine? Well, one thing you would have to do is you would have to ignore a lot of information. You would have to ignore the Budapest Memorandum and the fact that the United States' credibility is at stake when we said we would come to their defense if they gave up their atomic weapons. You would have to ignore all of the war crimes, the mass graves, the human safari in Kherson, and basically abandon any moral argument. You would have to abandon any dedication for liberal democracy and those values when it comes to Ukraine, saying that, that stuff doesn't matter. Say maybe you would color the president like he's a dictator and say that those principles don't matter. You would have to make it sound like the war is a lost cause, that basically Ukraine can be Ukraine or Ukraine can be Russia. It's their choice through this negotiation, which is what Trump has said. You would have to try different, not only PR messaging tools to try to affect the public perception to turn them against continued support for Ukraine, but also to give you political padding if you end up pulling the rug out from under them. So you could say, look, they were a dictator. They wanted to keep fighting. They actually caused the war. But if you're going to rewrite that history and try to, in a very short period of time, to make it so that Ukraine is much more at fault and we don't actually have any responsibility for their defense whatsoever, and it's not going to hurt us anyway. What's deterrence all that matter anyway? What price tag can you put on deterrence? Put one on a Bugatti, can't put one on deterrence. Well, it's not just about changing the public's perception around supporting Ukraine. It's about changing the public's perception around if we were to just straight up undercut them, undermine them, and abandon them. Make it seem like, well, maybe it wasn't all that bad. But to do that, you can't just change the public's perception of Ukraine. You have to change the public's perception of Russia. And you do that through not only the brown-nosing, but also the moving of the blame. And we've seen some of this from Trump himself, placing the blame for the invasion at the feet of the Ukrainians for not preventing the war. How exactly that would have been done is not described. That type of stuff doesn't matter. He says he can end the war in 24 hours, doesn't, then moves on and pretends nothing happens. The specifics, the nuance, how it actually is implemented, none of that actually matters. What matters is that Ukraine is to blame, and that's all you need to know. And so I wanted to show you how this spoken logic of the regime trickles down to other people who make up the rank and file around Trump, especially since he praises and rewards a sycophantic behavior towards him. And one example of this I wanted to show is a top Pentagon nominee. This guy right here is Stephen Feinberg. He is being nominated to be Deputy Defense Secretary. So this is the person under Pete Hegseth, right? The Fox News host who's going to need somebody of experience and knowledge, who's led an organization more than just like a small Girl Scout troop, since it's an organization of over 3 million strong. So he's being nominated, and Tammy Duckworth asks him to acknowledge the physical reality of how the war in Ukraine started. If you're going to be working at the Defense Department, you should know the news. You should know how how a war started. You should know basic military knowledge. Tammy asked her, Senator Tammy Duckworth asked him, who started the war? Did Ukraine invade Russia? Was the question. Look how he answers.
Senator Sheehy. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairman. I am looking at a Fox News article dated February 24th, 2022, and it features Fox News commentator Pete Hegseth, and the headline is, Russia invades Ukraine in largest European attack since World War II. Can you tell me if Russia invaded Ukraine? Mr. Feinberg? I mean, Mr. Hegseth said it.
Yeah, I understand.
It's easy, yes or no. Did they invade Ukraine?
I don't feel that I should publicly comment in the middle of a tense negotiation when I'm not privy to the facts to undermine what potentially...
You're not privy to the fact whether or not Russia invaded Ukraine and started a war that's lasted for 3 years?
I'm not privy to the details of what's going on in the negotiation.
Do you worry the natural reaction of the U.S. to this admin is destined to be as polarizing in the other direction? Or do you think Trump's rhetoric will continue to grow, making the U.S. more nationalist?
Do you worry the natural reaction of the U.S. is destined to be polarizing in the other direction? I mean, Trump is a polarizing figure. If Trump's president, your country's polarized. If somebody like Trump can be elected in your country is deeply polarized. There's no other way Donald Trump could be elected. Donald Trump does not get elected in a country where all the politicians and all the people are looking for political figures that speak like Angela Merkel. And you're sitting down, you're having calm, concise, like policy conversations about where to move forward. So, to be blunt, if Trump's president, we are going to be polarized. And you can already see his popularity, his polling data going down. You can already see Elon Musk's having long collapsed. And due to this fast-paced shotgun through-the-door strategy of doing so much at once to overwhelm the system, while it has allowed him to do so much at the same time that not everybody has fully processed all the stuff that he's done that's negative, if you do a bunch of bad stuff at the same time, then you can't just do that forever and not see your polling data go down. And so we're starting to see that. It has its downsides. If you put your engine on hyperdrive, eventually the cracks are going to start to form, even if people were confused at first. Anyway, can I just put out there, this question is not, is Russia to blame entirely for starting the war? This question is not, is Russia, evil? Is Russia unable to be negotiated with? Is Putin a despicable scumbag who, if you negotiate with, you're a piece of shit? Like, that's not the question. The question is, did Russia invade Ukraine? This isn't a question. This isn't a political question. This isn't even a question that should affect negotiations. It's a question of basic established fact. I'm asking you to acknowledge what is true and what we all know to be true because it was on TV, because we saw it. But we're in a position where we can't believe our lying eyes and ears because it might offend the Kremlin. We have to pretend that the Russians did not take their tanks, bowl over the border, and dump men, women, and children into mass graves. We have to pretend that didn't happen for their feelings. How do you solve a war if you cannot acknowledge how the war started? How do you stop a new invasion if you cannot even acknowledge that this was invasion when solving this war? in order to stop a future war from breaking out in Europe, so we don't have the largest war in Europe since World War II again in 4 to 5 years, is by acknowledging what led up to it. And if you cannot acknowledge who invaded, if you cannot acknowledge how it was done, if you cannot acknowledge why it was done, if you cannot acknowledge the basic facts and have that honest conversation with the American public or with the international community, then how are we going to solve the problem? It's not like Trump surrounds himself with regional experts. It's not like he talks to like Timothy Snyder or he talks to whoever. It doesn't need to be Timothy Snyder. But he hasn't surrounded himself with that type of regional expertise. And so instead, they're allowing the Russians to play them. They're allowing the Russians to dictate how the conversation happens. They're allowing to dictate most of the terms and concessions before the conversation has begun. And they're allowing to dictate the entire narrative about why the war started, if they even invaded. I mean, this isn't even a question about, is Russia at fault? You can invade a country and still be right in invading a country, right? It's just a fact that they invaded the country. They're not right in invading the country. They're wrong to do it, but it's just a fact. That's an undeniable fact. It's like watching a boxing match and saying, what? I didn't punch him. I don't know what you mean. We just saw it. But we have to pretend because we need to keep their feelings polished while we enter negotiations. Again, we are currently unable to acknowledge the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine while giving them every concession in the book. And we have yet to get a single concession in return. Every time that people are asked about concessions, or we have somebody ask what has been gotten in return, all we hear is they will make concessions. We hear a lot about the concessions we've made and about the possibility of Russia possibly making concessions in the future. But currently, all I see is a bunch of people who have completely bowed down. And I know Tammy uses this later, uses the word bow down to the Russians. She's right. I know these hearings are supposed to be hyperbolic and politicians go overboard, but if you're not able to say that Russia invaded Ukraine, you are bowing down to the Russians. You're getting down on your knees and you're licking the dirt off the bottom of their shoes. Because you're not even saying, oh yeah, they invaded, but it's okay. You're not saying, oh yeah, they invaded, but actually, it's a lot more complicated. You're saying, what invasion? Invasion? There was an invasion? I don't know, invasion. That doesn't sound like the Russia I know. That doesn't sound like the beautiful, anti-fascist, Nazi-killing, beautiful, amazing, freedom-loving Russians that I know. This is better than what Putin could have dreamed of. This is probably more than what Solovyov and the rest of them could have ever asked for. To the point where not only are they conceding to their demands, not only are they conceding to their narratives, but they're playing so stupid that it's like there isn't even an invasion at all. And selling out Ukraine is nothing more than like a real estate.
It's easy, yes or no? Did they invade Ukraine?
I don't feel that I should publicly comment in the middle of a tense negotiation when I'm not privy to the facts to undermine what potentially...
You're not privy to the fact whether or not Russia invaded Ukraine and started a war that's lasted for 3 years?
I'm not...
What a crazy fucking statement. I'm not privy to the facts. I'm not privy to the facts. What do you mean you're not privy to the facts? We're all privy to the facts because we all heard the same news that has been going on for 3 years.
Privy to the details of what's going on in the negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, what the sensitivities are, what the president's trying to accomplish. So I'd be afraid to speak out of turn and undermine that. I do have confidence that the president is very skillful at this, and he'll find the right way to help the United States. He's the first guy that brought Russia to the table to even begin a conversation, and I think
the president...
Yeah, he brought him to the table by conceding everything they wanted. If somebody comes to you and you're the chief negotiator and look, we need to negotiate with this company, but they want us to give up our best personnel, they want us to give up all this money, and they want us to give up the rights to this. And you're like, okay, I can get him to the table. Watch this. Then he walks up to them and, hey, company, you can have all the best of our personnel. You can have all this money, and you can have the exclusive rights to that thing you want. Well, okay, yes, we can make the deal then. That's not good deal making. That's just conceding. That's just giving them everything they wanted.
Is kneeling down to Vladimir Putin. I cannot believe the commander-in-chief of the greatest military on the face of the earth in my lifetime is bowing down to Russia. Let me just change the topic.
I don't.
First, I'd like to echo my colleagues in.
What do you mean you don't see it that way? You can't see it anyway. Apparently, you can't have an opinion. That you're such an NPC that you're not allowed to have opinions. You're not allowed to think things, and you're not allowed to acknowledge. Hey, who invaded Poland at the start of World War II? Can you figure that out? Can you open up the history book? Can you hit the books? Can you hit the books and figure it out? Oh, who invaded Ukraine? I don't know. Who did invade Ukraine? Hey, who's the other party in the negotiation? Oh, is it Russia? Could it be that the other party in the negotiation about the war where somebody invaded Ukraine was the party that invaded Ukraine? This is where we're at. This is Animal Farm, 1984. Don't believe your fucking lying eyes. Just ignore it. Who invaded who did what. Everybody's killing each other. People just dying. Forget the facts. Forget what happened. This is somebody who's broken into your home, shot your wife. You're now struggling over the gun. And someone comes in here and says, somebody shot somebody, someone broke into the who home? I don't know what you're talking about. We just need to find a solution. How about they could take your PlayStation and then they go home? And your wife. Like, you need to know the facts if you're going to solve the situation and stop it from happening again. And if we cannot have an open and honest, transparent conversation, we're not even including the Ukrainians, you're not building a foundation for peace, you're building a foundation for another war.
Enforcing my gratitude for the outstanding service of General Brown, Admiral Franchetti, and the other dedicated leaders who have been unfairly.
By the way, you're not only building the foundation for another war, you're building a foundation for another bigger war.
Trump and Hegseth's politically motivated purge of senior DOD leadership. Let me emphasize, this is not normal. The president does not typically replace nonpartisan generals and flag officers with his preferred choices. In fact, a president seeking to install loyalists among those who are supposed to give him the best military advice is highly concerning and dangerous, both to the good order and discipline of the uniformed services and to the country as a whole. Mr. Feinberg, we had a productive conversation the last time we met, and I actually enjoyed it very much. And I appreciate your frankness during that conversation. And I would like to reiterate my expectations for you should you be confirmed as Deputy Secretary of Defense. Given the utter lack of qualifications of Secretary Hegseth, who himself admitted he was going to hire people smarter than himself to help run the department, you will be the brains behind his leadership and lack of experience. You will be solely responsible for managing the budget and day-to-day operations of the DoD, and so it is imperative that you demonstrate to this committee and to the American people your ability to provide the stability, expertise, and leadership necessary to ensure that Secretary Hegseth doesn't run the department aground with indiscriminate budget cuts and unprecedented, politically motivated, and deeply damaging purges of highly qualified senior DoD leadership. Mr. Feinberg, I have asked this of every nominee before this committee, including yourself in my offices. If President Trump or Secretary Hegseth asks you to do something illegal, will you refuse to obey an illegal order?
I won't obey a legal order, and I don't believe either the Secretary or the President will ask me to do that.
Thank you.
See how easy that was to answer that question? Isn't that crazy? How easy he answered that question, but the last one, he was like terrified to say that Russia invaded Ukraine. He was fucking terrified. Like he was gonna be hung up from a lamppost. Like if he said that, he was gonna lose his job, family gonna be rounded up. He was terrified. Terrified. God, man. Is this where we're at? We're terrified of the Russians on our own soil?
Should you observe misconduct that is unbecoming or unlawful, will you report it?
Yes.
Thank you. Like I said earlier, you are it. You are second in command. The responsibility of an executive officer in the military is not only to execute their commander's vision, but to be a voice for his staff and manage the ins and outs of his command. Mr. Hegseth will not manage the minutia. You will. Mr. Feinberg,
Asking like if Russia invaded Ukraine is the type of question you ask somebody to like test if they like no my brain's a little lacking. It's like, is that an elephant? What color is this? What's 2 + 2? Did Russia invade Ukraine? It's like the type of stuff you ask to make sure that they're still with us,
I would
It's
like
like the type of thing you master right after object permanence.
to know, what are you going to do if the Secretary of Defense orders the pausing of a program critical to the readiness of the services?
I'm sorry, Senator, orders, what?
A pausing of a program that is critical to the readiness of our military services.
Obviously, I work for the Secretary of Defense. If he does something that I think is a real problem, I will tell him. I will give him my view. Ultimately, I will follow the chain of command and execute what he wants, as long as it's lawful. I do think that he will make good decisions. By the way, Senator, I also hope that we can hire, if confirmed, a ton of people, a heck of a lot smarter than yours truly. It's great to bring in talent.
It doesn't take a lot to be smarter than our Secretary of Defense and be more qualified, so that's a low bar indeed. Many of our recent nominees have been talking about hypotheticals, but I'm glad that you're talking about some of the decisions that are being made. Mr. Hegseth has already shown a willingness to make some bad decisions. I mean, he ordered DOD to hastily propose an 8% across the board budget cuts to the budget, while exempting non-mission essential expenses like the DOD's activities on the southwest border. Mr. Feinberg, the DOD isn't a place where we can afford to make mistakes. Are you going to allow an inexperienced team of software company interns to look at our most critical defense programs and make decisions that may impact our national security?
So that's about Doge. What she just brought up, are you going to make a bunch of like these interns, inexperienced interns? She's talking about the Doge, the 19 to 24-year-old, like Adderalled up groypers that they're unleashing into the IRS.
Be at the wheel.
I'm sorry,
Are you gonna let Doge in there and start making cuts?
So at DOD, and the Secretary said this, we are responsible for our own people. We are responsible for our actions and policies. DOD is in charge of itself. So no, Doge is not in charge of DOD. We're looking forward to working with Elon Musk. He has great expertise.
Oh my God. Could you imagine fucking one of those 19-year-old interns staring down like a 20, 30-year-old serviceman? Whatever. People with 30 years of experience in the armed forces being like, so what is this mortar thing you do?
Understanding, his great understanding of so many different things in DOD. He'll provide counsel and advice. We're looking forward to hearing that. But in the end, DOD is accountable to itself, must make its own decisions for its people and its policies, unless, of course, the president says, I want you guys to do this or that, and then, of course, we're going to do it.
Unless it's illegal.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Duck.
Has occurred.
Ugh.
You must understand, these morons have been listening to Russian lies about what went down in 2014. So in their minds, they think they know it all.
Some of them, I think the thing is, I saw somebody in chat like, Dylan, why do you keep acting like they don't all just act within Russia's interest? Like, well, I don't know if then that assumes that they're all Russian agents. That assumes that all of their main interest is just to help Russia before the United States, which I don't think is the case. I wouldn't be surprised if a few of them literally were Russian agents with the way that they talk. But I think that many of them probably either have interests that don't align with America's like deterrence interests in Europe, or they don't care about those interests, or they don't care about the same values like Ukraine's liberal democracy, or they don't care about how credible America is considered. So I can't say like all of their explicit interests is to help Russia. I think that's simplified. I think a gang of goons comes together for many reasons. Each goon has his own interests. Assets don't need to know their assets. That is true. That is true. Very true. Okay,